It is now my enormous pleasure and honour to introduce our first keynote speaker, Madeleine Alessandri. As Permanent Secretary at the Northern Ireland Office, Madeleine Alessandri occupies a vitally important role in terms of much of what we are discussing, and we are really fortunate to have her with us today. The Northern Ireland Office is undoubtedly one of the key linchpins for supporting relations within Northern Ireland, but also for relations between these islands, and therefore our first keynote speaker is in a position to offer insights into how she sees this functioning in practice. Before coming to the Northern Ireland Office, Madeleine was in the Cabinet Office, where she served as UK Deputy National Security Advisor, as well as being the Prime Minister's Advisor on National Resilience and Security. Since joining UK government service in 1988, she has held a number of key positions in the diplomatic service and in national security, both within the UK and overseas. So, without further ado, I will hand over now to our first distinguished keynote speaker, Madeleine Alessandri. Over to you, Madeleine.
Thank you, Anthony, and good morning, everybody. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be here to open the conference today. I wish it were face-to-face. I hope that next time we gather together in an event like this, we will be able to be face-to-face, because that enables us to make connections. And to be frank, as a speaker, it's much nicer when you have an audience you can see rather than looking at a screen where all you can see is yourself reflected back. So hopefully next time face-to-face, but now in virtual space. Anthony and all of the team at the Centre for Cross-Border Studies are very good friends of the Northern Ireland Office. And over the years, they have been a consistent and always constructive voice for civic society on this island. And the theme for today about testing the health conditions for the post-Brexit cooperation is, I think, a very important one. So ahead of the panel discussions getting underway, which invariably will tease out both the evolving political and social context, I thought I'd set out for you a few personal perspectives on what I think is required for good cooperation. The necessary health conditions, if you like, as I've experienced them personally over 3 decades of working in government, both internationally and domestically. Perhaps unsurprisingly, whether you're seeking to cooperate across borders, across organisations, or across systems, my experience has been that ultimately everything for success rests on relationships. How individual human beings interact with each other. Now, the people of Northern Ireland know that better than any other place I've ever worked before. It was relationships that secured the peace in 1998. It was relationships that restored the Northern Ireland Executive in 2020. It will be through positive and constructive relationships that Northern Ireland will prosper and rebuild after COVID. And I saw for myself at the Northern Ireland Business and Innovation Showcase just last week, which we ran in London, just how the connections, the understanding and the ambition of the business community is generating a really positive and mutually reinforcing energy that I think bodes very, very well for Northern Ireland's future success. So, when I'm not working, one of the things that my daughter and I enjoy, and my son and my husband hate us doing, is watching Great British Bake Off together. So I hope you don't mind that I'm going to have a bit of a cake analogy for my remarks today. And the cake analogy is because I think there are 5 key ingredients that are vital for the cake which builds successful relationships. And I think we ignore those 5 key ingredients at our peril. So let me briefly take you through them. The first key ingredient is truth. That's candour about the real position, no matter how uncomfortable. This is a precious commodity which we debase at our peril. Yet, too often, I've seen across these islands that people will accept a 280-character tweet as being the full picture, when in fact, frequently, it's a partial, sometimes slanted, and sometimes inaccurate representation of what somebody said or wrote. In any relationship, there are times when the truth is uncomfortable. The truth can be complex. The terrible scenes of disorder that we saw in Northern Ireland back in just before Easter of this year resisted simplistic analysis. There wasn't one factor, one truth driving the violence, but rather a multitude of factors at play. Truth can be awkward. It can be easier to evade. But evasion doesn't lead to stronger relationships. On the contrary, I'd say it weakens them. Between the different jurisdictions on these islands, we must never be afraid to have honest conversations. While we will not always agree, a constructive disagreement based on a shared understanding of the facts is always much, much more productive than a failure to confront those facts. Now, the second ingredient for my relationship cake is reliability. None of us likes a fair weather friend. Every relationship we have has good moments and it has tough ones. The people we count on are the ones who are there even when the going is at its toughest, and those who carry through on their promises and their commitments. The UK government has sought to be reliable and supportive in recent months as we have tackled the COVID pandemic. The government's response put in place a £352 billion package of UK-wide support to protect jobs and livelihoods, including, of course, the furlough scheme, the self-employed employment support scheme, and a number of government-backed loans. And in Northern Ireland, we estimate that these support packages have protected 1 in 4 jobs. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, we've provided the Northern Ireland Executive with an additional £5 billion on top of UK government funding to ensure it has the necessary resources to address public health and economic challenges. But we did so throughout COVID and continue to do throughout COVID through maintaining our constant dialogue with our colleagues in Dublin to ensure that there's clarity of approach, both north-south and east-west. Ultimately, stable, reliable, productive relationships will also underpin our future prosperity. So, as you know, the UK government is embarking on a very ambitious levelling up agenda. And we're now looking at how we can best work alongside the executive and with other partners to level up in Northern Ireland. We want, in partnership, to create the conditions for Northern Ireland to seize its economic opportunities and to see a real improvement in the life chances of all its citizens. Now, the extent of our success will impact on people on both sides of the border. And I hope you'll agree that a more prosperous Northern Ireland is good for everyone who shares these islands. My third ingredient of my relationship cake is understanding. To work together, to cooperate, you don't need to have the same political goals or objectives, or necessarily to have a common destination. But you do need to understand each other intimately, inside and out. You need to be able to walk in each other's shoes and empathise with the other person's point of view, even if you don't necessarily agree with it or accept it. Understanding helps build perspective, find common ground, split out what is emotion and what is evidence-based. And without understanding, no cooperation is really possible. The Northern Ireland Office has worked with colleagues in government to encourage the European Commission to hear from people across the community in Northern Ireland. It was very important that Vice President Šefčovič was able to hear directly from the people in Northern Ireland about the effects of the protocol when he visited earlier this month. It's enabled him to hear firsthand from a range of different perspectives, perhaps from some of you at this conference today. My department spends a lot of time bringing people together to hear from as wide a range of voices and interests in Northern Ireland as possible. Business roundtables, civic conversations, youth forum, and a whole load more, all with the aim of making connections and improving understanding. I was at the, as I hope a number of you will have been as well, at the British-Irish Association event in Oxford earlier on this month. That was a great example of people coming together from across these islands, from very different backgrounds, to have a wide range of conversations on difficult issues outside. It was energising and got renewed, and it was wonderful to be able to see people in person for the first time after such a long period away and to make those connections. For me, the fourth factor ingredient that you have in relationships is sympathy. Could refer to it also perhaps as affinity or rapport or fellow feeling. As humans, we don't always like everyone we meet. Sometimes we can develop an allergic reaction without quite understanding why. That's natural, can't be helped. But we do need to recognise it if we encounter it. And conversely, where an affinity or a rapport does exist between people, then cooperation between them becomes much, much easier. And it's no surprise that some of the time-honoured ways of getting to know people, to get underneath each other's skin, to really build a rapport, is best done and much easily done over food and drink rather than over a Zoom call, which has been a fantastic tool for us throughout the pandemic, but I think has reduced a lot of our relationships to be more transactional rather than empathetic. But now we're adapting to our new reality as we come through the pandemic, although I recognise we're not totally through it yet. We need to invest time in renewing our relationships, in getting to know new people, in taking time to understand the person behind the role or the job title, to understand the person behind the social media portrayal on Twitter sphere. And that's invaluable to building strong and enduring relationships. The final ingredient of my relationship cake is tenacity. Now, this may feel a strange one to include, but cooperation is much easier, obviously, when everybody wants the same things. It's 1,000 times tougher when there isn't a common endpoint in sight. In a sense, you could characterise the UK government's negotiations with the EU over the past 5 years in that vein. The UK government wanted to leave on the best possible terms. The EU didn't want the UK to leave, accepted that we were going, but wanted us to exit on the best terms possible. And it's when the going gets tough that tenacity is most required, to keep plugging away at a relationship. And despite all the noise politically, I think we should be collectively really proud that the EU and the UK government reached an agreement in December on the protocol and the TCA. It was last minute, yes, but it came because of the tenacity of all those negotiating, and then we reached a resolution for the benefit of both parties. Now, as any of you who are Great British Bake Off aficionados know, The way the cake turns out depends on what you do with the ingredients, how the oven works, the extent of mixing. There's always the risk of a soggy bottom along the way. So it is with relationships. You can't ever control all the variables. There will always be a temptation to cut down on one ingredient over the other for short-term expediency. It's something I've seen organisations do when groupthink sets in. Then the individual's instincts can get subsumed into the organisation will. Except, as I've told many people over the years, I don't think organisations have souls, people do. And so we should always listen to the voices of our people, and I contend encourage them and give them space as individuals to build relationships based on these 5 essential ingredients. Now, for those of you who enjoy anagrams, and if I could see you all, I'd ask you all to put your hands up and see who enjoys anagrams and who's worked out that truth plus reliability plus understanding plus sympathy plus tenacity spells trust. And I suggest to you today that it's relationships that build with trust that we need to nurture, we need to nourish, and we need to protect if we're going to successfully cooperate across these islands. So that's my recipe. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a really excellent conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madeleine. I wrote down that recipe very carefully. It's a wonderful recipe, and I think it's a rich recipe, but you were quite right. It's the mix of ingredients, how you put them together, and ensuring that you don't take shortcuts, because you might end up, as you quite rightly pointed out, with a soggy bottom if you don't put those ingredients together in the right, with the right balance. Absolutely fascinating insights there. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. And one of those actually is directly from what you were talking about, and it's actually going back slightly. I always say that in order for you to engage in cooperation, you need 2 ingredients. So my recipe is rather a poor one. It's probably from my Portuguese countryside background, and we have to, our recipes are pretty poor, pretty basic, but it is generosity and curiosity. Curiosity about what's happening on the other side of the border, what's happening on the other side of the fence, what are the people like over there, what are their issues, what do they want, but also that generosity of sharing yourself and your own issues across that border, across that fence, across communities. But you also mentioned in terms of getting to know people, and it's getting to know people fully, and not necessarily looking at a 280-character tweet and assuming that is the person. I'm going to ask you. You might take this as a slightly personal question, but I don't think it is. Do you find that in your own role as sometimes a difficulty that people don't necessarily they just see the headlines and don't necessarily know you or your officials or the civil service in terms of their own roles and their own jobs, and let's say their own pressures in terms of the work that they're undertaking?
It's a very good question, Anthony, and yes, I do think that there are times when people are not quite clear what the Northern Ireland office is there to do. I'm very happy to say that we do now have a publication which sets out what we're here to deliver. And we have a very clear vision, which is to make Northern Ireland an even better place to live, work and to invest. And underneath all of that, we have 4 pillars of activity. So that is all very, very clearly and stated now. But messages can get lost in the noise, and it is through constant dialogue and reaching out and taking time. And this is something which I think we have all lost because of the pandemic. We've all been going in and out of Zoom calls every 5 minutes. The time to actually sit down with somebody and explain on really difficult issues, such as legacy, where the thinking is and where the challenges are, and talking through the complexity of some of this. And so, you know, I'm delighted now that we can get out and about much more and have those conversations, because particularly on sensitive issues, there's nothing, in my view, that beats face-to-face and knowing the person.
Thank you, Madeleine. Now, I'm now reading from questions that have been submitted, and one of them is that you mentioned the importance of and the ingredients necessary for those strong relationships in your keynote address. So what is your current assessment of the relationship between the UK and Irish governments, and what is your department doing to support those relationships between the UK and Irish government?
Well, look, the UK has uniquely broad and deep common interests with our friends and our closest neighbours in Ireland. That relationship was central in supporting the people of Northern Ireland to deliver the peace and stability which is offered and continues to this day with the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And it remains just as important and key today as we work back together to build back better and unlock the many opportunities for Northern Ireland. And look, with all close relationships, there are occasions when we might not be in total agreement on certain matters. But in my view, that's exactly where the trust model comes in. It's through that truth, that reliability, that understanding, that sympathy, that tenacity, that I believe we can maintain a relationship built on mutual understanding. And of course, dialogue is essential in all of this. And whether that's through the formal institutions set up in 1998, the British Irish Council, the British Irish Intergovernmental Conference, conferences like today, or ad hoc conversations, keeping the lines of communication open is so important. And it's through this that we can build the relationships across these islands that all communities can be proud of. We have no closer neighbour than Ireland, and together we've achieved so much, and together we can achieve so much going forward.
Thank you, Madeleine. You also spoke of the importance of working together. I think you just glossed over that, or touched on that, when you don't have those same goals, same objectives. And so would you say this principle also applies, because you were just mentioned that in terms of relationships between the UK and the Irish government, but would you say that same principle applies when we're talking about the Northern Ireland Executive? How do you propose to make the institutions in Northern Ireland work so that all strands, and this is really important to the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, obviously, how do you propose to make the institutions in Northern Ireland work so that all strands of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement can actually thrive?
So, Anthony, I would say that all of us in public service and across civic society have a responsibility to the people of Northern Ireland to give them confidence in the institutions of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and to help really realise that vision for reconciliation, equality, respect for rights and parity of esteem. That also includes respect for the agreement's institutional framework, and in particular for its three-standard approach: devolution and power sharing, North-South cooperation, East-West cooperation. These are equal and interlocking and interdependent strands, and they must be properly held in balance in order to ensure full respect and equal treatment for the identity and aspiration of everybody. That vision is as relevant today as it was in 1998. And look, the people of Northern Ireland need, and they have consistently voted for, functioning, devolved institutions that are able to deliver for them. And my department remains absolutely dedicated to supporting that. What's important now, I think, is that we continue to create the space for dialogue and engagement in order to resolve differences where they exist, and especially to uphold the gains of the last 20 months since the functioning of the institutions was restored. And I would say that I think the way the executive have handled the most challenging crisis that has faced any government worldwide over the last 20 months has been really, really good. I think, again, we find it easy to find things to criticise when there are differences, but we should also hold on to what has gone really, really well. And for every government worldwide, COVID was a massive challenge, and I think Northern Ireland has managed its way through that very, very well. So look, at the end of the day, there is more that unites us than divides us. We need to keep having those conversations and hold open that space for constructive dialogue. Thank you,
Madeleine. Just on that issue, you talked about the importance of the three strands of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which, again, I have to return to the Centre for Cross-Border Studies' own position since 2016, which has been pretty vociferous in terms of its safeguarding, protecting, not undermining the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts. And perhaps there's been some misunderstanding, or let's say some glossing over some parts of the Good Friday Agreement, or favouring one part over another part. And you mentioned the importance of balance between all of those strands of the Good Friday Agreement. But this comes to the issue of tenacity as well, and constant dialogue. From our own perspective, I would say that if one of those, let's say it's a three-legged stool, and one of the legs is being damaged, we don't see really, we'd rather repair that leg rather than cut off another leg because one of the legs is being damaged, so you end up just with one leg which is completely unbalanced. Do you think we need to really have that tenacity, that constant dialogue in order to repair or to support, to strengthen the strand that people may feel or perceive or actually see as having been affected, rather than, well, that's damaged, so we're going to damage the other one, or we're going to withdraw support from the other one? Do we need tenacity, dialogue, in order to repair that, let's say, weakened strand, rather than affect the other one, or one of the other ones?
So Anthony, I like your stool model. I tend to talk in terms of a triangle model, because we've got the three strands, and those three strands are crafted in such a way to be in balance with each other, and the tension that holds us and that structure together. And so in terms of, I don't think about the stool which had a bit chopped off it. I think about whether one of the sides of the triangle is oscillating. And I think we are seeing one of the sides of the triangle oscillating at the moment. And what we need to try and do is steady that without creating oscillations in any of the other 2 points at the same time. So we need to find a way to get ourselves back into the balance, which I see represented by a triangle, and stop the oscillation that is going on, which is destabilizing everything else. So how do we bring ourselves back into a sense of sort of constant good space? And that's the challenge, but we need tenacity to do that. We need honesty about what people are feeling and perceiving in all of that. But what we absolutely must not do is, in trying to settle one side, create oscillations in another part of the triangle. We've got to try and bring it all back into stability.
Thank you, Madeleine. Your reference to the triangle kind of points to the fact that I was never good at geometry. I always go for the kind of literary or artistic comparisons rather than geometric ones. I'm going to draw this to a close, but you mentioned candour often during your speech, truth, hard truths, which is hard conversations, and this is a spoiler alert, that issue of truth candour, dealing with hard truths actually runs through this year's edition of the Journal of Cross-Border Studies in Ireland. Many of the contributors who didn't know what they were contributing to the journal, what each other's contributions were, truth, honesty, candour runs right through all of those contributions. But Madeleine, I would just like to once again thank you so much for taking the time out. And I know that there are other things going on right at this moment, really important conversations taking place at this moment. So I am so grateful for you taking the time out to actually be with us today, rather than being at one of those other conversations. We really value your input, your insights, and we really valued seeing you at the showcase last week, taking part in a panel. It's great to see you out there, and it was great to see you here with us today. So thank you very much, Madeleine.
Thank you, Anthony, and have a really good day.
We would encourage other people to get involved, because there's no harm in having conversations. The reality is that business found its voice during the Brexit process, but it can't be the only voice. It's got to get in there alongside policymakers, the third sector, get in there alongside our politicians to ensure that there's a deeper understanding, that there's an evidence base and an academic rigour to ensure that the right policy decisions are taken for the future.
We are extremely pleased to support the Centre for Cross